Since starting this project, I've become obsessed. Each file I glimpse at brings back a mixture of memories and feelings. Each file I examine brings out interesting clues that we never saw as kids. Each file I study brings cursed tales. We had hours of footage piled up. At our young age, we never delved too deep into them. Patience and attention is a fleeting thing when you're 10. But now, I have the drive and motivation to really inspect the finer details of each file. And doing this, I've started finding some strange happenings. It started not long after the previous post. After I closed things for the night, I started hearing a strange rustling. I was obviously perturbed, since I shouldn't have heard nature so clearly in the confines of my room. When I slipped off my headphones to try hear clearer, I practically slapped my forehead when I realized it was coming from the computer. While writing about the files I found, I had accidentally left the 2-hour night footage open. It was a quiet night, so I never realized it was playing in the background while I typed away, documenting my findings. I clicked on the background file as it still played out. Though the screen remained black, I could hear the clear sounds of movement. A shuffling, heavy with nature underfoot. As it came closer, it became more clearer. It wasn't hard to realize. It was footsteps. The last few frames of the file caught the lower torso of a person stepping into frame. It was obviously an adult, as looking back, we calibrated the filming height on us, kids. The only other movement on screen were the curled fingers of the figure in front of the lens as the clicks and rumbles rattled through the headphones, which indicated that whoever was on screen was fiddling with the camera. Then the video ended. Whoever it was had turned off the camera. As I stared at the option to replay the video, regret filled the pit of my stomach. If I had found this when I was younger, maybe things would have been different. Martin wasn't the most social kid, but to us, he was fun to hang out with. He often matched the mood of the room, which made him invisible to many. Unless the energy got too intense, Martin had his limit for social energy, and it was very low. This made him so inoffensive that he never stood out. He was known as the quiet kid. Our entire group was, but Martin especially so. This made some people scared of him. The old adage of the quiet ones are usually the crazy ones made some people think poorly of Martin without ever knowing him. Sure, we'd find him doing weird things every so often. Once we found Martin talking to himself in weird voices, and another time we caught him burning pieces of paper in secret. We figured he was just practicing survival skills or something. Martin never cared what people thought about him though. He had us, and that seemed to satisfy him. Looking back, I don't think Martin was ever into cryptids like James and I were. He just went with the flow, and that flow just happened to be mystery hunting, though that didn't stop him from adding to the group. Martin was the first to veto especially bad ideas that skirted on the line of dangerous. He was also great at constructive input, something James and I lacked. In some way, he was the most rational out of the group. Maybe it was his detached outlook that gave him a wider perspective on our plans. It was one of Martin's ideas that was the last we ever tried. The idea wasn't very complicated. We never documented this one either. It more came from the top of his head, and since it never required too much planning, we just rolled with it. Maybe it was its simplicity which made it better than most of James and my ideas combined. His pitch was simple. James would stand in the middle of an opening in the woods, while Martin and I would stay in the bushes, hidden. From there, I'd take the photo if anything approached, and we would team up if things got too sticky. We put a lot of planning on the hiding side of things. Martin and I made what were essentially homemade ghillie suits. We taped a heap of foliage all over ourselves and found some old children's face paint to mix up greens, browns and black streaks on our faces. This worked surprisingly well. When practicing, James said he genuinely couldn't see us, despite being about 5 feet away. Martin and I pocketed our Swiss Army set as well, both as a tool and as our protective weapons. Even though it's obviously frowned upon for kids to have knives, since we trekked the woods a lot, our parents made sure to teach us proper safety and trusted us to be responsible. While James stayed in the open, making sure to put on an act to look vulnerable, Martin and I muttered away to each other. It started as small talk to pass the time, but soon he took this opportunity to voice his frustrations. It wasn't just petty frustrations either. It was frustrations of his life. He lamented about his inability to socialize, how he gets bullied despite feeling like he didn't deserve it, and worse, disturbing things about his home life. Details too distressing for a 10-year-old to hear. Above all else, the one saving grace he wanted was for him to be my best friend. But he felt he could never have that. Martin was essentially jealous that I was closer to James. He spoke of how he envied how close James and I were, that if he had a bond like that, maybe his life would be much better. I didn't know what to say. In some ways he was right. I was closer to James. We shared bonds over our mutual passions, our passion of mysteries, shared interest in cartoons, and our many inside jokes. Things that never organically came from Martin. The only way Martin was ever included in a joke was when he made himself involved. I tried to tell him I admired its qualities, that we were still close no matter what, and most of all, to not worry about that sort of stuff. But that plea fell on deaf ears, and soon he shuffled away. I tried to stop him, but he wasn't listening. This upset me. It's one thing to have a fallout, but this operation meant a lot to both James and I. If I had chased after him, James would have been left unattended. If someone was acting as bait and the backup left, if something were to happen, the bait will be taken. Even as a 10-year-old, I knew that was a bad idea. I made sure to stay around and be there for James, even if Martin didn't want to. Besides, I had the camera anyway. I had a job to do. But Martin didn't leave. In fact, he did the opposite. I watched with a very confused look. At first, not knowing what I was looking at, nor what to do, as foliage started to move. A bush inched its way closer to James. I wondered if it was the cryptid we were after finally choosing to reveal itself. James never realized something was approaching. I was frozen in a fearful anticipation. Just as I realized what it was, the bush stood up and attacked James, completely catching him off guard and dragged him away. The only glimpse of something human in the bush was the painted face of Martin. I fled. I didn't know what to do. Nothing ever went wrong at that age. I wasn't equipped, both physically or mentally, to deal with something like that. When I got home, it wasn't long until I was questioned by police. I wasn't very cooperative, but eventually Martin confessed to everything. I was let off the hook, deemed to not have been complicit in the act. Martin took the full blame. James was dead, and Martin was locked away. That was a story that was officially reported, and that story was a complete lie.